Hi, I'm the Woodpecker today. My Vanity is almost finished. I'm making the final touches on the case, the drawers, and also the countertop. At the end of my last episode, I managed to finish the doors. But it's far from being finished. I still have a lot of sanding here and there to do. But while I'm sanding the back, I realize that I didn't cut the back rabbets. I get the router out and cut the first pass. Yes, the first pass, and in this pass I cut at the right depth, but it's not wide enough. So without touching any router setup, I remove the pit bearing and put a smaller one. This will allow me to cut a wider rabbet. The last thing to do is to cut the corner square. All done. Now I need to start to work on the drawers. I begin by surfacing a piece of maple for the false fronts. Okay, I have enough. I need to rib them straight. Next, I glue them together and leave this alone for a long while, because I need to make the actual drawers before I touch the false fronts again. So, for the drawers themselves, I go inside my old shop and get some oak moldings I still have on my wood rack. Then I rib them all into thin strips. Next, I cut all of them longer than what I need. Okay, I think I have enough. Now I need to glue all of them into panels. It's quite simple. A bit of glue on the edges, some clamps, and a bit of patience while I wait for the glue to dry. The next morning, I sand all the panels smooth and to the right thickness. Some panels were glued way wider than my sander's capacity. I ripped them in two. Now I'm able to finish the job. This will be enough for the 3 drawers I need. But I still need to rib them to the height of the drawers. Next, I can cut one end of each glue up straight. Place a stop for the long side and cut all the long sides. Then I move the stop and cut the short sides. And here are all the pieces for the 3 drawers. To join them together, I'm going to make and cut dovetails. The first thing I do is mark the thickness of the wood with a marking gauge on the long sides. Next, with a compass, I mark the placement of the dovetails. On top, I trace a straight line and an angle line on the front. To avoid any mistakes, I mark what I need to remove and cut all the dovetails for all the sides in one shot. When I'm done, I use several chisels and remove the unwanted wood. I use a square block to help me make the cuts straight. This takes several chopping sessions, And in between them, I remove a bit of wood to help before returning to chopping wood. I do the same for the other side, and eventually the piece of wood gets free. Then I just need to clean between the dovetails. When I'm done with the dovetails, I still need to make the pins. After marking the thickness to cut, I clamp each mouthpiece and trace the shape of the pins. I also trace a straight line just to guide me so I can make a straight cut. Then I cut the pins. Next, I clean in between them. This is quite similar to the dovetails. The last thing to do is to make sure both pieces are a perfect match. Since they are, I repeat the same operations for the remaining corners. Next, I assemble all the drawers and mark the location where I need to cut a groove for their bottoms and cut them. Then I reassemble the drawers again and measure their bottoms. Finally, I cut them. Before going any further, I check if it's the right size. Since it is, I carve the date on the side of each drawer. Now I'm ready to glue them. But first, I sand the inside of the drawers. Gluing this is quite easy. A bit of glue on the joints and a bunch of clamps. Luckily, I have this many clamps because it takes a lot to glue 3 drawers at once. When the glue is dry, I can sand the exterior. Now I'm ready to start to work on the top of the vanity. I begin by cutting a piece of cherry a bit longer than the top. The top will be made of this piece of oak and the cherry I've just cut. But just like the cherry, it needs to be cut. But this is a bit heavy. René is giving me a hand. And together we put it on the workbench so I can cut it. Next, I rip it in 3. The first cut will be the backsplash. But this piece of wood is way too thick to cut it in one pass. So after cutting it halfway, I go back to the beginning and finish the cut. I do the same thing to cut the rest in 2. But I'm not done. I also need to surface the cherry. When it's straight on 2 faces, I cut the other side with the table saw. But I still have another rough surface. Since it's quite heavy, René helps me again. But when I lay the pieces together, I can clearly see that the cherry is not really straight. I need to fix this. So I recut both sides with my rail, just like I did with the oak. Then it's perfect. I just need to mark the placement for the mortises I'm going to cut. The first mark is not too close from the edge. I mark for 6 mortises that I cut. Before I glue this together, I check if everything will be okay. Since it is, I can take this apart. Here, I'm pretty happy both pieces are not cut to the same length. And now I can glue the first two pieces together. After spreading glue on the edges, inside the mortises, and on the dominoes, I can put this together. The last thing to do is put a bunch of clamps and wait for the glue to dry. The next day, I lay the third piece in place, mark for more mortises, and cut them. Then, just like for the first two, I spread glue. But when I'm ready to put this together, I ask for more help. The last thing to do is add some clamps and wait. I have some wormholes and a loose nut. I need to take care of that. I begin by cleaning them. This is not too difficult. Then I mix some epoxy and fill up the holes. Again, not too difficult. The nut will be where the sink will end up, but the wormholes will stay. I like the look. This adds a nice touch. When the epoxy is dry, I need to take care of the glue squeeze out and the excess of epoxy. I'm scared that this will be a problem when I'll bring this to get sanded. I clean both sides. And here's the thickness of my vanity top before sanding it to get sanded. But to get this sanded, I need to put it inside the truck and bring it back to the sawmill where I bought this wood. While the top is away, I can continue to work on the case. This case needs drawer slides. The first thing to do is to drill pilot holes so I can screw the slides. To keep the slides straight while I drill the pilot holes and screw them in place, I use a spacer under the slides. I use the same spacer on the drawers for the second part of the slides. The first drawer in place. For the others, I cut some spacers. They will keep the other slides parallel to the first one. I repeat the same thing for all the remaining slides. And now I have 3 drawers. But I still need to make some false fronts. To do so, I use the maple glue up I did a long time ago. The first thing to do is to surface it to the right thickness. But as usual, my thickness planer leaves a pretty bad surface. I finish the job with the drum sander. I also use the orbital sander. Okay, it's now time to cut that to the right width. And with the 2 adjacent doors in place, I can check if it's okay. Since it is, I cut the V-grooves. When the V's at both extremities are cut, I move the fence and route the last 2 grooves. Then I can cut the 3 false fronts. Now I can check how this fits. Not that bad, but I can see that the bottom of the top drawer is a bit low and the top of the bottom one a bit too high. I fix this right away. This will be perfect now. The last thing to do is to sand the false fronts. But it's only now that I notice that I have nothing to block the drawers in the front. so I glue some strips between the slides. This doesn't take too long, and now I have a bunch of strips in place. When the glue is dry, I just need to sand everything again. Yes, because I made the last sanding 6 months ago, and now the false fronts are not the same color as the rest of the cabinet. I also sand all the spots that have never been sanded before. Now I need to close these 2 holes. It's quite easy. I just cut some plywood. All done. Finally, I get my countertop back and all sanded. It didn't lose too much thickness, but this is not its final dimensions. To figure it out, we lay the top on the case and I mark what needs to be removed on the back. And I cut it exactly like I did the last time. Then I cut both ends. The top is now flat and straight, but not really smooth. I need to sand it again. The backsplash that I cut a while ago is way too thick. I rip it thinner and sand it. Then I cut one end straight. Put it in place and trace its exact length. And back to the saw. Okay, it's a bit too long. It's better than too short. Now that's perfect, I can mark where I'll drill the backsplashes mortises and cut them. Then, just like for the top, I check the fit. Since I'm good to go, I glue it in place. Again, not too complicated. A bit of glue and clamps. I wipe the excess and leave this alone for the night. The next morning, I sand the glue squeeze out on the back. Now I'm ready for the finish. I begin by cleaning the shop a bit and spray the doors. I'm quite happy. It's almost over. But if you wish to see the vanity installed in the bathroom, you'll have to come back to the Woodpecker.